Good morning. Welcome. My name is Craig Anderson, and I am going to be the board host for today here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Reston. It's really nice to see everyone here today. Reverend Scott has pointed out it's a little bit of a light house. I think that this is one of the signs of spring. The flowers are blooming. I tried to wear something more spring-like. Reverend Scott's bike is in his office. And a lot of us didn't make it on time with the switch to daylight savings time. So I'm also advised we should try not to look too smug if people come in late because they overslept. So whether you're here on Zoom today or here in the church sanctuary, I'm so glad that you're here with us today and know that you are welcome. No matter how old or young you are, wherever you are in your spiritual journey, however you identify and whoever you love, you are always welcome here. Have a couple of announcements today. One is for, I believe it's next week, Reston Cups invites all families to learn about Ostera and the spring equinox here at the church in the sanctuary at 11:45. Participants will paint wooden eggs, get to plant their own flower seed and take it home to grow. We're also going to read a picture book inspired by the holiday. Children 4 years of age and up are welcome and should be accompanied by an adult. Snacks will be provided. So please register by March 12th if you'd like to attend that event next weekend with Linda. And you can sign up right here in the East Foyer after church. And another announcement, so don't forget the Stewardship Gala next weekend. Kara, as the lead of the stewardship campaign, was the arms in the air whooping sound. Check with Kara if you have any questions. This is a really big event every year, and although we call it the Stewardship Gala, it's for everyone, whether you can pledge this year, whether you can't pledge this year. It's also just a great community event. So Saturday, March 19th, we hope you'll join us. We have an amazing evening planned. 18th. I got the wrong date. All right, I shouldn't read the script too carefully, apparently. So everyone should have received an email if you're a member of the congregation, and probably a paper mailing as well. It's certainly an email with the invitation for the gala. There's also some sheets of paper right outside, which I left over there, which gives you all the information about it. You can grab one on the way out. But we hope everyone will come, and this is the big kickoff for the stewardship event for this, or for the stewardship campaign for this year. Those were the announcements. So at this point, let's center ourselves for worship. In a moment, the choir is going to come up, and let's take a few deep, quieting breaths and center for worship as we listen to the prelude for this morning.
Our opening words this morning come from an old Unitarian congregation in England, which begins each Sunday service with these words. This house was built and set apart as a place where men and women might come to view their lives anew. It is no holier than any other place, except that we have agreed amongst ourselves, agreed without so much as a word passing between us, that here it would be unseemly to speak falsely or to think harshly of one another. All life should be gentle, kind, and loving. Every day and every habitation filled with compassion and peace, but we know it is not so, perhaps not even possible. So we gather here to remind ourselves of the truth and the right, to gain strength and to bring light into our lives. Welcome to our good and gentle house. Our opening hymn.
Our opening hymn today is hymn number 1, May Nothing Evil Cross This Door. If you are at home on Zoom, the words will be in your chat box, and we invite you to join us. Here in the sanctuary, please rise in body or spirit and join us in singing.
By
be strong to keep hate out and hold love in.
Good morning. Before we light this morning chalice, we need to consider one of our deeply held privileges of this country. It is the free church tradition we love. And that a church to be free in its traditions is not free to its congregation. It is not free to us when we find someone in need. It is not free to us when we want to repair an injustice and where aid is needed for marginalized people and immigrants, or when we are offended by an attack on democracy overseas or within the very confines of this nation. We dig deep into our pockets for whatever is necessary. On the home front, we will retire our building debt, and that is not free. And we look forward happily for a new minister as we sadly say farewell to our current minister. That will not be free because we got a real good deal with our current minister. As we light this morning chalice this morning, we count on your generosity as central to our well-being, our free church, with traditions of freedom that are not free to this congregation.
Here at UUCR, we have a lovely tradition of singing our covenant together every single Sunday. Love is the spirit of this church. The words will appear up here on the screen, and if you are at home on Zoom, they should be in your chat box, and we invite you to sing along. If you are visiting us this morning for the first time, we hope you will accept this song as our blessing to you.
Now is the time for all ages, so if you're feeling young of body or young of spirit, come find a place closer up here on the floor or in a chair. And if you're with us online, you have one of the best seats in the house already, probably, right? So welcome. Our story this morning is inspired by a Jewish wisdom tale. It's being retold in a completely different way for you today, this morning. Once, not so long ago or so far away, there were two women who lived in apartments across the hall from one another. They were really good friends. One of those women lived all by herself, and the other had 3 children. One day, right after payday and the check in the bank, the woman who lived alone went to shop for groceries. She went to the grocery store and she picked up food for the next 2 weeks. And as she was coming home, she thought, my neighbor works very, very hard. And she has 3 children to feed and take care of. She needs more than I do. I think I'm going to give her a little of the food that I got so that it'll make things easier for her. So she moved some food into a bag and put it down in front of her friend's door, and then took her own groceries in. A little later, she'd actually done this because she had seen the woman and her 3 children drive away. So they came back, and as they were coming back, this woman thought, my friend works very, very hard, and I know sometimes she has troubles making ends meet. She's all by herself, and when she gets old, there will be no one to care for her. She needs more than I do. So I want to help her. So she put together a bag, left it at her friend's door, turned, saw the bag of groceries on her own door front, and thought, that's odd. But I have people who help me from time to time, so that's great. And they went into their house. The next time payday came around, the women both had the same idea. The one with no children was excited to go grocery shopping and had thought through what she was going to get for her friend. And as she drove away, once again, she saw her friend drive, as she came back, she saw her friend drive away, so she said, this is safe. I'll put together those groceries and put them on the step. Her friend was also excited and went to the grocery store with the 3 kids, having talked about what they would get for this friend who lived alone. They had all these exciting ideas, and they put together a special bag and left it on her door. Another payday came along, and the same thing happened. Both were excited about what they were going to get for their friend. This time, when the woman who lived alone was putting the groceries at the door of her friend, the other family had gotten through their grocery shopping so fast because they were excited that one of the children ran up with the special bag for her, put it at the door, turned around, and they both saw each other and started laughing. The rest of the family came and saw what had happened, and there was laughter and hugs. That evening, they planned a special dinner together, and they promised that they would always care for one another. I wonder what might happen if we each bring a little bit more of that love and generosity that those 2 women showed into our own lives and our own community here at UUCR. We'll now sing the children out to religious education, and I hope you'll all continue talking about this.
I wanted to talk a little bit today about community and how important this church is to my sense of it. In our increasingly connected digital world, more and more of us are finding community hard to come by. We run rat races keeping up with ever-increasing demands on our time and money, and there's not a lot incentivizing any of us to slow down and really commune with those around us. We get so stressed, so busy. We'll say we'll go next week, we'll volunteer next year. I know I've really fallen into that in these pandemic recovery months. There's a favorite Rumi quote of mine that says, "Be with those who help your being." I think many of us have a much more visceral understanding these past few years of the pain that comes with isolation and why we should strive for its antidote. Connection, community, shared spaces, and shared goals, these are what combat isolation. 50-some years ago, a group of people in a fledgling planned community in what had previously been farmland got together and started this church. Some of them are still here today. For over 50 years, people have shown up here, cared for each other, invested in each other, and worked with each other, which is the only reason here is still here 50 years later. And it's the only reason here was still here when I, an isolated single mom reeling from some very sudden life changes and newly arrived in Reston, staggered in one Sunday morning. I want here to still be here for the next isolated new mom or newly arrived Restonian or anyone. There is a quiet radicalism in just showing up, not for the income or the tax breaks or because it looks good on college applications, but just because you are glad that a thing exists in the world. This church has become that for me. Just pick something that matters to you and support it. Find those that help your being and be with them. Show up with your time, show up with your money, or show up with your talents. After all, the strength of a community lies in its variety.
Thank you, Kit. So now is the time in our service when we share our joys and concerns so that no one ever has to hold them alone. I want to begin by lighting a special candle this morning for Dee Dee Barron. She was a young college-age student who died last week. She was attending our church for a number of years. Celebration of her life and a viewing will be next Saturday, March 18th, from 2 to 5 p.m. at Adams Green Funeral Home over on Eldon Street in Herndon. And the reception will be nearby but elsewhere. But I never met Dee Dee, but I understand she was a lovely young person, and we mourn her loss this morning and light a candle in her memory. So this is the time when we share other joys and sorrows. If you are joining us remotely this morning by Zoom, you may wish to light a real or virtual candle wherever you are to mark what is on your heart. And as members of the congregation who are here come forward and place a stone in the water for each joy or sorrow or concern they have, you may write your joy or sorrow in the Zoom chat line, but do remember that that does become public. And now, as the music begins, let us join in our ritual together. Let us be one in spirit. O Spirit of life and love that so faithfully animates this creation of ours, we are grateful for this community which remains with us in both times of joy and sorrow. And we hold in our hearts all this morning who are facing any hardship or difficulty in their lives, those who are grieving, facing illness or disability in themselves or those close to them. We would especially have you hold in your hearts this morning Keturah Collins, who fell and broke her wrist at home this week. She's got some surgery coming up, complicated. Thoughts out to Keturah and Henry. Whether shared here this morning or held silently in our hearts, may our joys be multiplied in community, and may all gathered here this day find comfort and calm. Amen.
Well, we've been talking a lot about stewardship as we do this time of year, and Kit, thank you for that wonderful testimonial today. But now we're going to turn our attention to others and to the social action and social justice work of the church. On the second Sunday of each month, it's a dedicated offering to an organization chosen by the Social Action and Social Justice Committee. All of today's offering, except for pledge payments, which should be clearly marked, all of today's offering will go to the Migrant Solidarity Mutual Aid Network. I'd like to read you a statement about what it is that they do. The Migrant Solidarity Mutual Aid Network helps migrants based in Washington, D.C. Helps migrants who are bused to Washington, D.C. by border state governors. The network comprises over 20 D.C. area community grassroots organizations and hundreds more individual volunteers, including UCR members. I'm sure Steve Ewart could probably tell you more about it. And those volunteers are committed to supporting these migrants. The network has been showing up to immediately welcome our new neighbors for many months, and through solidarity, not charity, helping them to meet their immediate needs and to get started safely here or in their ultimate destination. So you may make your donation in the link on the chart, which will appear shortly, and in your order of service, or you can place your donation into the offering baskets that are being passed around. If you write a check to UCR, please include the word migrant in the memo line and put it in the offering basket or mail it to the church. And of course, you can always put cash in the offering basket as well. Thank you for your generous support to this organization.
So have you heard the one about the rabbi, the Buddhist monk, and the Unitarian Universalist minister who live not far from here? They share a little lunch once a month, and they have a little spiritual practice they do before they eat. Well, it was the rabbi's turn to suggest the spiritual practice, and the rabbi, she said, "Brothers in faith, I want to hear what 3 words you want spoken at your memorial service about you." And the rabbi turned to the Buddhist monk and said, "What 3 words, brother?" And the Buddhist monk thought for a while and said, "He walked peace." And both the rabbi and the UU said, "Oh, that's lovely. He walked peace." So then they turned to the rabbi and said, "Well, Rabbi, this was your idea. What 3 words do you want spoken at your memorial service?" And she thought for a minute and she said, "She served justice." And both the UU and the Buddhist, "Oh, that's beautiful. She served justice." So then they finally turned to the Unitarian Universalist and say, "So what 3 words do you want spoken at your funeral?" And he said, "Look, he's moving." That's the best Unitarian joke I know. I love that joke, not only because it points out that most UUs aren't really enthusiastic about waiting for an assurance of eternal life. We'd rather take our chances, thank you very much, with this wonderful yet fleeting life we have. But actually, all joking aside, there are actually 3 words I do want spoken at my memorial service. Hopefully several years down the pike from now. I hope people will remember me by saying, "He was generous." I believe just about the nicest thing you can say about another human being is that she or he is generous. And I personally aspire over my lifetime, and I'll say a little bit more about this in a moment, to become the most generous human being in every way that that word can be meant, spiritually, emotionally, and financially. This Sunday, next slide, first slide, I continue my sermon series, my year-long sermon series here, 12 Gates to the City, How to Enter the Holy City of Your Own Life, with a sermon on the most important human quality of generosity. Because I am convinced, to return to the image that I've used again and again during this series, I'm convinced that if we are to enter the holy city of our own lives, that fullest, noblest, most satisfied self, if we are really to experience the divine traffic that is everywhere around us, we must know deep to our hearts, day to day, how to live generously in all the little ways that make such a big difference in this life of ours. Now, generosity, it seems to me, is not some simple, singular quality of human being, as some imagine. To many in this money-oriented, some might say money-obsessed culture of ours, generosity simply means financial generosity, the noble act of charitably or selflessly giving, which all the world's religious traditions lift up and promote. This, of course, is an important aspect of generosity. The kind of generosity I'll return to at the end of the sermon, because this is Stewardship Sunday after all. And I'd be ministerially malfeasant if I didn't talk at some point before the sermon ends about your generosity to this place. But I want to talk about 3 other kinds. Next slide. 3 other forms of generosity: spiritual generosity, emotional generosity, and what I will call religious or theological generosity. These are at least as important as financial generosity. Let's begin with the first, spiritual generosity. To me, the spiritual quality of generosity, that quality of being human that really opens us up to full and joyful living and makes us truly good and kind persons, is much more than simply opening our checkbooks every now and again, sharing from what abundance we have. Being spiritually generous means that day in and day out, you give freely out of yourself, pouring yourself out to the world and others, if you will, giving time, giving care, giving attention, giving support, sharing concrete resources and possessions of all sorts freely from your inner reserves, so that others, most especially strangers, might be enriched and blessed. Spiritual generosity happens when we set aside our quite natural human instinct to keep and have and hoard and risk sharing our many forms of abundance with others. The old tale, which Linda revised to a modern setting, the old Hasidic tale, has two brothers who are giving grain back and forth to one another across the field. That story suggests to us that we do stand on holy ground when we are generous to those around us, as these two women were across the hall from one another. I hope it makes self-evident sense to all of you that the habit of regularly and freely and generously giving from the self in your day-to-day interactions just leads to a happier and fuller life. Next slide. While the miserly and the greedy, this is Walt Disney's Uncle Scrooge, seal their lives away from the world in airless tombs of hoarding and having, those who give freely out of themselves in their abundance, again in all the little day-to-day ways that make such a big difference, are the human beings who in the end lead the richest and most joyful lives, because they're freely participating in the holy traffic of life, the give and take that enriches us. One of the finest descriptions of what it means to have a life of spiritual generosity comes from Alfred North Whitehead, the mathematician and philosopher. Next slide. He articulated what is called the law of expenditure, and I quote from him: "The secret of happiness lies in knowing that we live by the law of expenditure. We find the greatest joy not in getting, but in expressing what we are. There are tides," he goes on, "in the oceans of life, and what comes in depends on what goes out. The current flows inward only when there is an outlet. Nature does not give to those who will not spend. Her gifts are merely loaned to those who will not use them." And then Whitehead goes on, "Empty your lungs and breathe. Run, climb, work, and laugh. The more you give out, the more you shall receive. Be exhausted, and you shall be fed. People do not really live for honors or for pay. Their gladness is not in taking and holding, but in the doing, the striving, the building, the living." And then he goes on, "It is a higher joy to teach than to be taught. It is good to get justice, but better even yet to do it. Fun to have things, but more fun to make them." And then he concludes, "The happy person is the one who lives the life of expenditure, the life of love, not for the honors it may bring, but for the life itself." So perhaps the most important, fundamental form of human generosity is this spiritual generosity that doesn't involve money. The everyday quality of lending yourself freely to the world. If you're a tight, hoarded up person, all is lost. Back to my slide of the 3 pillars. Now I want to move on to the second pillar of generosity, emotional generosity, which in my logic follows the first, the spiritual. Emotional generosity simply means having an open and compassionate heart. Emotional generosity is the quality of being kind and welcoming, understanding, and forgiving, a key word, of persons around you in all their limitations, imperfections, and flaws. Emotional generosity means that you give others the benefit of the doubt, that you cut them some slack, if you will, and that you are slow to be harsh or judgmental or condemning. As I thought about it, I realized pretty quickly, and I trust that this will make sense to you too, that only people who can be truly emotionally generous to others in their everyday lives are those who know themselves well and deeply enough to know that they stand for a little cutting of slack and a little forgiveness themselves. They're aware of their own The truly generous are truly aware of their own imperfections and shortcomings. The most generous person I have ever known in my life was the Reverend Dr. Eugene Pickett. He was a longtime friend, mentor, colleague, and for 8 wonderful years he was my boss at UUA headquarters, who lived until his death several years ago to the age of 94. Now, over his lifetime, this increasingly gracious and kind gentleman had come to understand his own human weaknesses and limitations. And so, as he told me when we discussed some difficult persons around us, he was able to become more generous and tolerant, emotionally speaking, when he encountered when he encountered the same kind of less than perfect humanness of which he was aware in his own self. I am passionately persuaded that you can't be truly generous to others deep inside your soul, where it really counts, if you think of yourself somehow as humanly or morally superior to others around you. So a spiritual prerequisite, if you will, to natural and ready and general generosity is a certain discerning honesty and modesty about the limitations and flaws of your own self. Let me speak personally and perhaps even a bit too confessionally for a moment. Emotional generosity toward others, especially those with whom I'm in some sort of conflict or tension or people who have hurt me, has not always been easy for me personally, especially when I was younger. I came from a family, how can I say this, that could be quickly and sharply judgmental. I had one parent in particular. All right, it was my mother. Bless her heart. She was great, but boy, did she have a sharp rapier wit. Anyway, she saw the world pretty much in terms of her way or the highway. And all 3 of my brothers and I learned this very deeply. And she was not very tolerant toward ideas or behaviors that did not seem ideal or right to Marcia. As a result, I realize now that when I left my family nest and started out on my adult journey, those many years ago, I had been imprinted with this way of seeing the world and reacting to trouble around me. And I was not always, therefore, instinctively or readily generous. Another way of saying it is that I wasn't instantly magnanimous when I perhaps could have been to people who frustrated or disappointed or hurt or even bored me. Because of some of the rather hard-nosed and judgmental modeling I received when I was young, I have over the years, as I hopefully have matured as a human being, I've had to work at learning how to become more generous, understanding and tolerant of others in my heart, especially when I get really hurt or really frustrated with someone. I am, as they say, a work in progress in this regard. And I suspect I'm not the only one in this room with this journey. I do take some spiritual pride in the belief that as I've gotten older and have become, again, like Gene Pickett, familiar with my own weaknesses, I have, I think, learned to become more naturally generous and understanding toward others. You know, I share this mantra with some people in counseling. When I'm struggling, when I'm with somebody who's struggling to come to terms with somebody who's difficult in their lives, I've come to believe that generally most people we encounter in our lives are doing about the best they can with their circumstances. There are, of course, a few genuinely malevolent and purposefully nasty and disreputable people out there, I will name no politicians, who do not deserve much understanding or generosity. But in my almost 74 years now of life experience, I'm persuaded that most people I encounter in my world are just normally flawed and quirky individuals, and they're out there struggling to get themselves and their interactions with life right. And when they fail, well, they're just like me. I believe that one of the almost universal benefits of getting older, and there aren't a lot of them, is that life inevitably humbles us and teaches us mercilessly about our imperfections, so that as we age, I pray we become more generous toward persons other than ourselves. At least this is the path that I am on, and I hope you're on the same path. All of this is by way of saying that I believe one of the most important kinds of generosity a person can possess is a simple emotional generosity of the heart that sees other human beings, again, most especially those we're having trouble with, not as some sort of wholly differentiated species, some pitiful earthly human beings, but rather as fellow travelers struggling to find their own way about as best as they can. This is the emotional platform from which I think we build better lives and learn how to participate in that divine traffic back and forth. Okay, back to the chart again of the three. Now, the third type of generosity I want to talk about is religious or theological generosity. As I thought about generosity, I realized that this religious organization, the UU Church of Reston, is all about nurturing and extending the human quality of generosity both within ourselves and in the culture. We proudly call ourselves a liberal congregation. Now, if you look up in the dictionary what it means to be a liberal, what do you think it says? The first definition of a liberal is, quote, one who is generous. Did you know that? Liberal, one who is generous. I like the way writer Steve Kangas puts it. Liberalism has been defined as generosity, tolerance, open-mindedness, and a willingness to give. And another writer says it this way: at its core, modern liberalism is rooted in generosity and compassion. It is this generous and caring and humane spirit that has in fact always animated our 500-year-plus old faith tradition. My colleague, the Reverend Burton Carley, I think I've got his picture up here. There he is. He once beat me out for a church in the South, but I still like him. He asserts that the very purpose of our gathering in religious community here in Reston and all UU churches is to create, quote, more generous lives. That is the mission and the purpose of our church. I like, this is the way he says it. I've got this up on a quote. The purpose of our church is not to give you, as some churches promise, the formula or secret to receive the generosity you believe you deserve from on high, but rather to create generous lives. The adventure of faith for us, he goes on, is not to have a strategic plan for obtaining blessings for ourselves, but rather how to live a life that blesses others. I think Burton Carley has it exactly right. This congregation was formed 52 years ago now on a liberal spirit of generosity. Our liberal theology asserts the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Now, what can be more generous than that idea? We are supposed to be generous and compassionate and inclusive toward all. We're supposed to grow bigger hearts. And the open and tolerant way we practice our religion, by holding our UU beliefs and ideas with a certain modesty, a certain gentleness and skepticism, means that we strive to be respectful toward all those who disagree with us. We have a theological generosity here in our better moments toward faiths which disagree with us or see the world very differently. And because we understand that we're to be generous, we, I think, should be able to be in sincere and theological conversation with conservatives and others who disagree with us. Though frankly, we as religious liberals don't always live up. We're a work in progress in this regard too. This is in literal fact the house here in Reston which generosity built. And I hope that whenever you come through our doors here at 1625 Wheatley Avenue, whether it's to attend worship or attend an adult enrichment class, or help with the hypothermia project for the homeless, or work with others to clean up our grounds, or bring your kids to Sunday school to ensure that they're exposed to religious and moral values that will serve them well for their lives. I hope that whenever and whyever and however you come here, you understand yourself on a journey to try to create a more generous life than you had when you first walked in the door. Generosity of spirit, of thought, of principle, and of deeds is a pillar of this place. So, we are called every day to lead larger and more generous lives. But please, dear friends, don't think of all this cultivation of generosity within the self as some sort of pure, noble sacrifice you're making just for the good of others. Sure, other human beings are always blessed when we're generous, but I suggest generosity, first and foremost, allows you to enter the holy city of your own life. You get a direct spiritual benefit. Whenever you're more generous, you are blessed first, beyond any blessing that you give to the world. When we are generous, whether it's by writing a large check to a human service agency we believe in, or by giving a less than totally competent coworker that we supervise the benefit of a doubt, or by continuing to offer support to an old friend who keeps making the same self-limiting mistakes again and again and again, or by giving up every Wednesday to teach a new immigrant how to speak or read English, or by reading that bedtime story to your child that you really hate for the umpteenth time. We are blessed in any of these events with the gentle but sure knowledge that we are doing something compassionate and right. And so we're legitimately able to feel good about ourselves and how we're living out our lives on earth. What I'm saying is generosity always carries with it its own self-validating and self-generating reward of the heart. It blesses you first, no matter how much your generosity blesses the world. And that brings me full circle to the importance of financial generosity. Look, it's Stewardship Sunday. You all knew this was coming. I'll make it brief, but it was coming and it's here. I believe that one of the pillars of human generosity is financial generosity. In fact, when I put together my book, Everyday Spiritual Practice, Simple Pathways for Enriching Your Life, I asked my colleague, the Reverend Tony Larson, who's in Racine, Wisconsin. I know he gives about 30% of his income away every year, has for decades. I asked him to write a chapter on tithing as a spiritual practice, which he did. Tony, by the way, as the minister, has been serving the church in Wisconsin that I'm going to serve, and I'm going to have a continuing relationship with him. In any case, he talks about the practice of tithing 10% of everything you have or earn, not to your church. That's a little much for most people. 10% of what you have should go to other things and organizations. Tithing 10%. This is a practice that my husband and I try to achieve every year, that we give 10% of our income and assets away. I think it is important when you think of the discretionary money you have in your wallet, which you can choose to give back to your world for charitable purposes, you don't regard that money as some sort of filthy lucre that you want to give away to make yourself feel better. Rather, money is the capital for the good and caring heart, that you can make a better world. It is a good and joyful thing for us to give money away because it stands for the human responsibility and care that we strive to bring to the world. You know, I had a parishioner 2 churches ago. She was an 85-year-old woman, and she came up to me one day and said, "Scott, I'm afraid I'm so old now, all I can do is give money." That's what she said. All I can do is give money. And I said to her, what do you mean, all I can give is money? There is nothing shabby or partial or inadequate about giving money. Giving away money is as important as any other form of giving things to the world. So please, don't minimize or dismiss the importance of your financial gifts as an 85-year-old person. Your monetary gifts are as concrete and as valuable a form of your love and care for the world as somebody volunteering 20 hours at a food bank, which you can't do. You should be proud of your financial generosity. You should be proud of your tithing and proud of all the good that you and that money does in the world. Don't say all I can give is money. Money is important to give. Now, with all that said about the value and virtue of financial giving in your life and the spiritual practice of tithing, of course I realize that some of us are not able to engage in the practice of giving fully 10% of what we earn back to our wider world. No, some of us are living on very fixed incomes, marginal incomes, it's hand to mouth. Some of us have virtually no discretionary income, like when you're simultaneously putting 2 kids through college, or paying massive medical bills for a sick spouse, or living on fixed Social Security in your 80s. But I would be spiritually remiss if I did not at least encourage all of us in this community, which devotes itself to helping us express more generosity in our living, toward the virtue of always moving toward the goal of tithing just as much as you can out of your discretionary income. Charitable giving is a spiritual practice that brings not only wealth to the world and agencies and organizations and causes that need it, but it's just simply plainly the right thing to do. So let me close by reminding you that there are many ways to be a truly generous and charitable person. There's spiritual generosity, living by the law of expenditure, day by day, just pouring yourself out to the world, not being miserly like Scrooge, but just giving yourself away to the world in all the ways that that's possible. Spiritual generosity. Then there is emotional generosity, possessing the kind of understanding and forgiving hearts that is genuinely accepting of the humanness of others. And then there is theological and religious generosity, having a faith that upholds the worth and dignity of all persons as they come in their imperfectibility. And last but not least, yes, there is financial generosity, unstintingly returning a healthy portion of what you earn, perhaps as much as 10%, back to your world that creates a more generous life and a better world for others. What I'm saying this morning is obvious. Generosity is a gateway. It's a gate into the holy city of your own life, because without that divine traffic flow back and forth, you will never lead a full, satisfying life. Whenever we live in generosity and with generosity, not only do we bless our world and others, but the simple fact is we receive incredible blessings ourselves. It really is, I think, that simple. Amen.
Our closing hymn is number 1028, The Fire of Commitment. Well, please rise as you are willing or able and join us in singing.
From the light of days remembered, burns a beacon bright and clear, guiding hands and hearts and spirits into faith set free from fear. When the fire of commitment of the flame that burns within. Then our promise finds fulfillment, and our future can begin. From the stories of our living rings a song both brave and free, calling pilgrims still to witness to the life of liberty. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment, and our future can begin. From the dreams of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment, and our future can begin.
May the love and strength and generosity of our faith sustain us in the years ahead. For our tradition is of freedom and reason. Our tradition is of justice and inclusion. Our tradition is of compassion and empathy. Unitarian Universalism has always been a source of healing and hope in the world. Let us make that so. Amen. Steve, go ahead.
Okay. We now extinguish this flame with the appropriate implement. Whoa! A fire in the house. But not the light and truth and hope, the warmth of community, nor the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Well, this brings us to the end of our service today. Oh, sorry, I forgot the choir piece.
We're practicing that flawed humanness.
Yeah, I'm working on it right now. You don't want that.
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend
Okay, now this brings us to the end of the service. I'm so glad we didn't miss that because that was awesome. Thank you. For those of you who are here at church, please join us for some refreshments, some coffee out in the East Foyer. For those of you who are on Zoom, please join us for a virtual Greet Your Neighbor coffee hour. Discuss the service theme today and enjoy fellowship with other congregants. The link is in the chat box. That should be available on Zoom. I can't help noticing that there are a few more people here now than at the beginning, so I think we've all adjusted to the time, and so glad that everyone was able to be here today. Thank you.